Long story. This series of events took place about 7 years ago. I was having a smoke outside my small duplex apartment at about 4 a.m. I worked midnights and had an odd schedule, so it wasn't unusual for me to be alone in those early morning hours when almost nobody was awake. Occasionally, I'd have a chat with my neighbor. She was probably in her early 60s and had suffered a stroke in the past. She was very sweet and didn't have anyone to vent to, so I would listen, smile, and try to be good company. She's mostly unrelated, but will come up again later. So there alone, cigarette in one hand, half a blunt in the other. It was practically silent that early in the morning, which is the only reason I was able to hear some footsteps coming from the nearby alleyway. The view was obscured by some tall bushes in my neighbor's yard, but I could see a small figure approaching. "Can I bum a smoke, bro?" says the figure, who was about to turn the corner and reveal themselves. I immediately responded, "Sure, no problem." As the person comes into view, I was a bit surprised to see it was a short man. Maybe I should note these next details, but I feel like I must because I feel like it adds context to the situation. If you are sensitive to the mention of race, skip forward to the next paragraph. I'm mixed, white and black, and I have waist-length dreads. This guy is dark-skinned African American. I live in a small rural town in Ohio, and I'm one of the very few non-white people in the area, excluding the kids from the local colleges who come from all over the world, but are rarely seen off campus or outside of the bars and whatnot in my experience. The fellow was dressed like he was from the city, or somewhere a bit fancier, or more urban than what I was used to seeing locally. He was super relieved to see me, and even more excited when he saw I had a burning blunt. I offered to share and basically let him have the rest. We instantly hit it off, making random small talk. I have pretty serious social anxiety. I always think I sound stupid or lame when I talk, so I really just wanted to shake hands and part ways. I eventually asked him how he ended up in the alley at 4 a.m., and he had a pretty crazy excuse. Allegedly, he had come to Ohio from somewhere south. Can't remember which state he told me. I didn't care too much. According to him, he was sold on the idea that rural Ohio was a wonderland of druggies, which was pretty much true, and he intended to come here and hustle up a small fortune. Unfortunately for him, soon after arriving in town, he went to a local bar with 2 women, began flirting with other women, and the females he was with allegedly got jealous. They all stormed out of the bar, got in the car, sped off, and eventually tossed him and all of his loose belongings out of the vehicle. In the short time before going to the bar, he'd allegedly spent all of his money doing drugs, instead of hustling, so he was dead broke. He also reveals that he had a history of being arrested and being shot at. He alleged that it was all based on baby mama drama, and that he was in fact the victim. I was in no position to argue, so I just listened and smiled. He told me great prison stories of defending a man. After being released, he learned how to make meth as a favor from the defended man's brother. It all tied in with his big hustle plans. I, on the other hand, worked midnights, and had a new baby, so I wasn't really about that life. Not anymore, at least. I went through a wannabe rapper phase in early 2000s. Before I knew it, 2 to 3 hours had passed. He's still talking and shows no intentions of moving on. I'm overly polite, so I was stuck. My now wife came out and saw what was going on, understandably confused. She makes it awkward enough that he leaves. A few hours later, my downstairs neighbor is banging on my door. I had hardly slept, so I didn't want to answer. He tells me my friend is outside waiting for me. So there he was, wanted to chill and chat. Which a year prior, I would have been okay with that. I would have smoked him out and chilled, but I had a kid and a girlfriend and responsibilities, so it caused issues, to say the least. He said he was out looking for money or a ride, trying to make calls, etc. The whole thing was shady, and I had a weird feeling about him, but he was genuinely cool towards me, and treated me like he'd known me for years. I felt pretty bad for him considering that the small town we live in can be kind of racist, suspicious, etc., and he stood out like a sore thumb even to me, myself being among the weirdest looking and the most noticeable person in town. Plus, I thought I was somehow discriminating. I knew how that felt and wasn't going to pass it on. I knew I was his only bastion of hope. Nobody else was going to help or let him hang around. It's a small town, there's nowhere to go. So I ignored things like, for instance, when I asked him where his stuff was, he went back to the alley and came back with a few trash bags and a big girl's purse. He said that a man saw him get kicked out and gave the bags to him. He offered the purse to me for my wife. I politely declined, but appreciated the gesture, I guess. It felt weird, but again, I was afraid I was discriminating somehow. I gave him a big luggage-type bag I had gotten as a gift years before and never used. He transferred all the stuff into the bag. Only saw a few things like a sweatshirt. He wore the sweatshirt later that day and it totally clashed with his style and seemed too small. I felt like it wasn't his, but thought I was jumping to conclusions. I grabbed him some food from inside and gave him like $20 for survival, and also a bribe for him to leave. He eventually took off in search of rides, women to stay with, money, whatever. As night fell, I got super cold, and when I cautiously crept back out to smoke, he appeared again, like he'd been hanging around the area for a while. He looked super cold and was shivering and rubbing his hands together. At this point, I really just wanted to let him crash on the couch. But again, I had a woman and a new baby in the house, and I didn't know this dude. So I got him some blankets, Hot Pockets, some snacks, and let him crash in the garage we shared with the neighbors. Needless to say, they were surprised to find him there in the morning. This time, he said he was my cousin. They didn't like it and confronted me about it. I apologized and told them the truth, excluding some important sketchy details because I knew they'd probably get him in trouble somehow, and I felt bad. I knew I had to work in the morning and was not going to leave with him creeping around my house with my family home alone. He was a stranger, and I wasn't going to take a risk even though I sort of blindly trusted that we respected each other. I went online and found bus tickets for that day. I was ready to just pay for them as a good deed and drive him to the stop. When I came out and told him, he was really thankful and thanked me so much for looking out for him. At some point, it took a weird turn. He showed me a security camera that looked broken and offered it to me or was trying to sell it for cash. I didn't want it and doubted it worked and knew there was no fucking way he just legally obtained it. Still, I just wanted him gone, and I didn't want to betray him or dime him out. He left on one final search for money. I gave him another 20, hoping it would keep him out of trouble. Finally, after another few hours, I heard radios outside of my window. I headed downstairs before I even heard knocking. It was the cops. Luckily for me, it was a very calm, professional officer, much unlike many I've dealt with in this town. He told me my wife's bike had been stolen and they had found it. He starts to question me about the individual. When they arrested him, he described me as a tall white guy with a mohawk. I'm guessing he was possibly looking out for me and not trying to involve me further or cover up what came next. I think he planned on returning the bike because his possessions were still in my garage. I told the officer the truth. I told him about how I met him, had he been around a few days, how I gave him some money and was going to buy him a ride home because I didn't want him around when I went to work. I didn't tell him any of the stories he told me or anything about the hustle plans, the blunts, etc. I felt like I was definitely going to be accused as an accomplice. I have tattoos all over, long dreads, wore hoodies and jeans every day. I thought for sure they'd assumed the worst. Luckily for me, they'd already spoken to my neighbor, and she said I was a very nice man, that I rarely had visitors, that I am a good dad, etc. A stellar review, to be honest. The officer said I was smart not to let him inside and didn't ask much else. We got the bike back. He was on parole or something and not supposed to be out of state. All the items in the bags were stolen from my neighbors around the corner, down the alley he appeared from. Turns out people he robbed were into drugs and stuff and ran into him earlier to make some deal. He came back, stole a bunch of clothes and allegedly panties and sex toys? I'm not sure if the panties and dildos... I'm not sure if the panties and dildos things was true. And I only found that info out because that person was robbed was also my coworker. So yeah, don't share cigs and blunts with randos at 4 a.m. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more or simply like to support my channel, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out. Until next time.